Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about the first 3 years as a professional developer, kind of a developer's journey within the first 3 years. So I'm going to go over the big bullet points first, and then I'll double back and jump into the details. All right, year one, what's called the learning curve. So point number one, feeling of overwhelm, very common when you're learning something new, especially something complex like coding and web development. It's pretty overwhelming. There's many choices out there, many things to consider. Very common. So if you're just jumping into it, you're starting to look at it, you should expect at point feelings of being overwhelmed, but don't worry, because as you progress, things are going to get easier and easier and easier. Don't worry about that. Number two, tutorial-itis. One of the things I see so often is that noobs, people who are just jumping into the game, they're continuously looking for more and more tutorials, more and more tutorials. And the reason they're doing this, number one, is because they're insecure about getting into the real world of coding. This you should not do. You should do your foundations, 1 or 2 tutorials, and then get out there and start building real projects for real clients, because one of the realities of being a noob coder, especially in the first 2-3 years, is that you're constantly learning. That's why in my method of teaching, I say learn the fundamentals well, really well, 1 or 2 tutorials, and then jump into the thick of building real world apps for people. You start with simple ones and you progress from there. Even later on in your career, even with 3, 4, 5 years experience, there will be moments where you're going to have to learn something new. In my own career as a freelancer, I'd walk into a project, sit down, look at the specification, and then I would choose a technology stack appropriate for that particular job. And sometimes I would have to learn a brand new tech to do it. It's par for the course, not something you should be concerned about, especially if you're well trained in your fundamentals, because learning new technologies, new languages, new stacks, etc., it's not that difficult once you have that background, that base in place. So the third major bullet point is analysis paralysis. Decisions, as I wrote. What do I mean by that? The web development world, the development world in general, is vast. You have so many options. You have so many options, so many technologies. Do you learn JavaScript and Node? Do you learn Python, Django? Do you not learn PHP and Rails? PHP Rails. Ruby and Rails. Do you not learn Ruby and Rails? That's a joke. Do you learn Ruby and Rails? Do you learn PHP Laravel? Do you learn Java and Spring? Do you learn C# and .NET? So many choices, so many choices. Again, so what happens, it's kind of related to tutorial-itis, where you start just doing tutorials. This is a question of you looking, trying to decide which direction to go down in terms of what path, which technology path, which language path. Do I choose the Python path? Do I choose the JavaScript path? Do I choose the Java path? This is an illusion to think that you're going to choose the wrong path. And the main reason is because the fundamentals of JavaScript, Python, PHP, C#, Ruby, Swift, they're all pretty much the same. What that means is that, let's say you decide to concentrate on Node.js and JavaScript. For you to jump into Python, Django, or PHP Laravel, or C#.NET, etc., is not that difficult. In fact, you could jump from one to the other if you're properly trained within a couple of days, if not sooner. So don't worry about choosing the right stack in the first year. You cannot choose the wrong stack simply because they're all related, and you can just shift and rattle and roll as experienced developers do. All right, let's jump to year number 2, where you've done your foundations, you've done your fundamentals, and you're starting to build things. You got a job, you're in there as a junior developer, maybe advanced junior, beginner, intermediate, and you're getting paid, you're doing work. Oh, by the way, in year 1, within 45 days, you can start getting work as a junior. But anyway, that's another story. So year 2, you're in there, you're actually writing code, you're building apps, you've done a few things, you're confident as a coder. You're not ready to take on a whole project as a lead yet, especially a project where you may have other developers on the job, but you're definitely somebody who has a pretty good idea what they're doing. Now here is, well, let me just read my paragraph here and I'll jump into it. So year 2, new tech addiction. A young nerdling's trap into believing that some new tech will give him the big advantage in the market. This is very, very rare. Once in a while, a game-changer tech does emerge, but this is rare and is becoming more rare since software development has become very mature. I can identify year 2 coders or people who are at that just intermediate, beginning, intermediate level coder. I can spot them when they start saying things like, Python is the best language and everything else, it's okay, but Python is your best choice, or Java is your best choice, or C# is your best choice. Your choice of programming language and choice of stacks is really circumstantial. It depends on the type of work that you're doing, the available jobs out there, and the type of work that you want to do. If you want to do mobile development for iOS, chances are you're going to go to Swift, right? You're not going to be doing that in Python. If you want to go AI programming these days, you probably want to get into Python just because there's opportunity there. If you're going to do freelance development for small business, your best choice is going to be PHP and server-side programming in that regard, et cetera, et cetera. So you notice when I'm talking about these different technologies, I'm not saying that Swift is the best overall, or PHP is the best overall, or Java is the best overall. I'm saying that it depends on the type of work that you're doing, who your client is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Young nerdlings in year 2 tend to really concentrate on minutia that they're concerned about within a particular technology stack. So they may like Node better than other back-end frameworks or back-end engines because Node is really good at asynchronous delivery of data. Very good at... Very few apps need that, right? And so when you look at a technology, you have to look at not just what that particular app needs, because depending on the type of app you're writing, it may need different capabilities, but you also have to look at the business environment around it, right? So if you have a business, I've talked about this before, who's heavily invested in .NET C#, it's not likely they're going to want to jump into Python Django or Node.js with JavaScript. They may do it, but very unlikely, because if you think about it, if you're a business owner, do you want to be invested in all kinds of different technologies where you're going to have to get all kinds of different developers to maintain it, or are you going to want to stick with one particular technology stack where you just need one flavor of developer? So if, let's say you're in the C#.NET stack, that your app is built out of that because you're leveraging Microsoft technologies, you're going to want to stick to that because then you just need to hire C#.NET guys or girls. On the other hand, imagine if you had an app, part of it was written in C#.NET, part of it was Python, part of it was, I don't know, whatever, Ruby on Rails. Not that you want to do that, but you know, I'm just joking with Ruby guys, by the way. You don't want to be all over the place. It's too expensive. So I think year 2 nerdlings, they get in this idea that they're going to find some super duper tech that's going to give you a huge advantage. It happens once in a while, but it's very rare. It's becoming more and more rare because the technology that's out there, the stacks that are out there, are all pretty mature. They're all pretty mature, so they're all pretty capable. Year number 3, this is when you reach what I call the professional plateau. Let me just read my paragraphs and I'll get into it. Like most skills in life, by the 3rd year, you will enter a comfortable phase of your development career and you'll feel confident that you could lead projects and perhaps even lead less experienced developers. A good thing, though, is if you follow the path that I lay out in my courses on this YouTube channel, you can start earning money within the first 45 days, 30 to 45 days, as a junior coder, as a freelancer, etc. If you look at some of the quotes under some of the videos, you see that several people have done it. You know, there's lots of people who have done it. They haven't written quotes publicly. Yeah, so that by that 3rd year, you've reached that plateau, that level of skill where you're confident you've built enough things for the last couple of years, you've learned to tech, you've built enough things, you've taken projects from A to Z, which is very important. I talk about that in other videos. It's very important that you finish projects. You've gotten out of the tutorial trap where you're continuously doing tutorials. Yeah, one of the misconceptions about tutorials is that they somehow represent the way you have to do things. Tutorials are just showing you a way of implementing things. You can implement a shopping cart-based system 20 different ways. Many different languages, even within the context of a particular language, or say you decide to do with C#.NET or Python Django. There's many ways you can implement a shopping cart system. So any particular tutorial that you find that teaches you, for example, a shopping cart system, is just showing you a way that it can be done. Depends on the circumstances of the cart. You may, depending on your client's needs, let's say they're dealing with physical products, that you're going to have to implement your shopping cart system, your e-commerce system in a different way. If they're doing digital products, you may have to implement it in a different way. If they need a couponing-based system, you may have to do it in a different way. I've implemented cart systems, e-commerce shops, several times, not just for myself, but for clients as well in the past. And I've done it each time in a totally different way, depending on the need. So one of the misconceptions of the year 2 nerdlings is that, year 1 nerdlings, is that there is, these tutorials represent the way of doing things. They are not. They're just examples of how you might implement things. That's why when I teach, my tutorials are a small part of my training, because once you do my fundamentals, then you can use any tutorial on the web, and away you go, Bob's your uncle, right? So it's not a big deal. So yeah, by year 3, you're in a situation where you don't feel a need for tutorials. You may refer to a tutorial just in case, I need to learn how to set up Node very quickly and to do a chat thing. So you go in there, boom, you do a quick tutorial on YouTube, there's plenty out there, boom, 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 and you'll be able to run even through the worst tutorials. Because you're experienced in the fundamentals, you understand what you're doing, you'll be able to use any tutorial. You won't even have to go to a video tutorial. You could just go to the Node site and check out Node, and they'll have little quick tutorials on how to set it up, how to get it going in your classic projects. And away you go, no big deal. So by year 3, you're in this professional plateau where you are pretty competent. I wouldn't say you're an uber expert, but you're competent, and you could tackle projects with confidence and get things done. After that, then it's a slow incremental process of getting better and better. Year 5, year 10, year 20, etc. And you become more mature. But I think the 3-year mark is when I have seen, not just with programming development, but with martial arts, with playing drums, with business. In the 3rd year is a year when you kind of reach a level of competency, if you will, professional competency. All right, to recap very quickly, the first 3 years as a web developer, year 1, I call it the learning curve. The main message here is don't worry about it. This is actually the toughest year. This is the year where you're going to face the mental and the psychological hurdles because it seems overwhelming. You stick to the fundamentals. You do your fundamental training, and then you get in there and you do a couple of freebie projects, wherever you use a site like Upwork, or you go see a local business, you do 1 or 2 little freebies, consider those your stashes, and then you'll be ready to go. And in fact, you could get past this first year if you skip the pitfalls that a lot of developers get into. You don't let yourself get overwhelmed with all the choices out there, because it's an illusion. As I said, once you learn the fundamentals of programming with JavaScript, you know the fundamentals of programming so many other languages. So don't feel overwhelmed. All these frameworks, Python Django, PHP Laravel, Ruby Rails, etc., they're all based on very similar principles. Yes, they're different, but they're in many ways, but they're MVC based. They all have ORMs, etc., all the authentication layers, etc. So once you learn one framework like Rails or like Python Django or like PHP Laravel or Cake PHP or Symfony or whatever, once you learn one, for you to jump into another framework, even in another language, is no big deal. So don't feel overwhelmed. Don't get caught up in tutorial-itis. Don't just keep trying to hold off from actually getting out there and doing real work by trying to do more and more tutorials. You do your foundations, you do 1 or 2 quick tutorials, and then you jump into the real game. And then you learn more stuff as you need to learn based on the needs of the project. So as I say, you learn on a need to nerd basis. You don't it's an illusion that you're going to come into the game knowing everything and you're just going to go, la, 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 I've done this all before. That will come eventually, but that takes years. So yeah, don't get caught up in tutorialitis, and finally, don't get caught up with analysis paralysis. Don't worry about, oh no, am I going to learn the wrong language? Oh no, that's impossible. You can learn any language, any programming languages that you want, and you can't lose. You can't lose, because 100% what you learn in Swift will be fantastic and usable in doing JavaScript, or fantastic and usable doing PHP, and fantastic and usable in not doing Ruby. So yeah, number two, year two. That's when you're writing code, you're getting paid, you're pretty confident in what you're doing. You're still learning, but you're confident. And the big trap I find is people are getting married to a tech. They think that there's some game-changing tech. Oh, Python, Django, that's it, man. That's all you're going to write your code in is Python. That's it. Or no, you got to do everything in PHP Laravel, otherwise you're a loser. That again is a year two noobling. Junior coder, but professional, but junior. Don't get caught up in that. When you get to year three, you hit that professional plateau, meaning you've really hit a good level. It's kind of like when you hit a black belt, I guess, in jiu-jitsu. You may not be the best fighter out there, but you're competent. You know what you're doing. You've done enough sparring. You know what you got to do when you get in there, and that's where you want to be as a coder. That year three, jiu-jitsu, I don't know how long it takes to get a black belt, some 3 years, some many years longer, depending. Or businesses too. Interestingly enough, most businesses reach a level of which we call establishment. They establish themselves, most businesses, in 3 to 4 years. So, again, year 1, 2, and 3, as I'm listing out here, these are ballparks. It may take you a year and a half to get through the learning curve stage, if you will. It might take you, a few months if you follow my stuff. Shameless plug. Then year 2, it could be a year and a half, it could be 2.5 years, it could be, depending. You don't want to get caught up in this whole idea, one technology is ultimately better than another. It's all circumstantial. Number 3, when you hit the professional plateau, where you know what you're doing, and you start thinking in more advanced ways. For example, one sign of a professional developer is that they don't think that any language is necessarily better than all languages. They realize everything is circumstantial. A professional plateau coders are comfortable going to projects, comfortable learning new tech depending on the needs of the particular project. So there you go. That, from my experience, going back to the 90s, is ballpark the succession from year 1, 2, and 3 in terms of becoming a professional web developer. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you take some of the early lessons to heart. And let me leave you with this again, because I feel probably a lot of beginners are watching this. The first year, in terms of the psychological barriers, the fears, the doubts, the insecurities, in terms of the technological barriers where you may not understand, why are we doing objects? What's the whole point of an object? Or I don't understand recursion. Why are we using recursion? These are coder things. These are programmatic issues. These doubts and these things that are unclear in the first year or the first 6 months, depending, it will go away. And once you get past that hurdle, once you get past that barrier to entry, it's smooth sailing. So just remind yourself, the first several months is the hardest period, and it just gets easier and easier and easier and easier. By the time by the time you're in the third year, you're like the master of your domain. You feel pretty good about yourself as a developer. This is assuming that you're actually writing real code, working with real projects, working with real clients, not just doing tutorials. Let me emphasize that. You don't want to get caught up in tutorial hell. And some of the best tutorial makers out there, like Brad Traversy Media, he does some of the best out there. Even he'll tell you that. You don't want to get caught up in doing too many tutorials. Anyway, there you go. Hope that's useful. Ciao, ciao.